The sea was calm, until it wasn't. The peaceful waters exploded instantly as a 15-foot great white shark lunged at a lone fisherman, its jaws locking onto his boat and pulling him into the depths. The predator circled relentlessly, repeatedly striking as blood filled the water. Barely conscious and clinging to life, the fisherman fought back with his knife, each second a brutal battle for survival. This is just one of 6 harrowing shark attack stories that will leave you gripping the edge of your seat. The coastal village of Adrasan in Turkey is a quiet, picturesque place known for its calm Mediterranean waters and vibrant marine life. Nestled along the Lycian coast, the town has long been a haven for fishermen and tourists. Its turquoise waters teem with fish, making it an ideal spot for fishing, diving, and boating. The Mediterranean Sea is home to various shark species, including the rarely seen great white shark, which occasionally ventures into these waters despite being more commonly associated with the open ocean. On June 4, 2003, Mert Kaya, a 47-year-old fisherman, prepared for another day on the water. Mert was well known in Adrasan for his deep knowledge of the sea. He had spent most of his life fishing along the coast and knew its rhythms better than anyone. That day, like many others, he set out early, rowing his small boat toward a secluded cove a few kilometers from the village. The sun was just rising, casting a golden light over the water. Mert's routine was simple but demanding. He baited his lines, cast them into the sea, and waited patiently for a catch. Fishing had been his livelihood for decades, and he often joked that he could tell what kind of fish was on the line just by the way it tugged. By mid-morning, his boat rocked gently on the calm water, and he had already pulled in a few good-sized fish. Around 10 a.m., Mert felt a sharp tug on his line, stronger than anything he had experienced that day. The pull was violent, almost ripping the rod from his hands. He stood, bracing himself as he fought to reel in what he assumed was a particularly large tuna. The rod bent under the strain and the line hummed with tension. Mert leaned over the boat's edge, peering into the clear water to catch a glimpse of the creature on the other end. What surfaced was not a fish. Without warning, a massive great white shark lunged from the depths, its jaws snapping shut on the side of the boat. The force nearly tipped the vessel, and Mert stumbled backward, stunned by the sight before him. The shark was enormous, over 15 feet long, and its powerful movements sent waves rippling across the water. Before Mert could react, the shark struck again. This time, its jaws clamped onto his leg. The force was like nothing he had ever felt, and he was yanked off his feet and overboard. The cold water engulfed him as the shark pulled him under, its grip unrelenting. Mert thrashed and kicked, his hands scrambling for anything to hold on to. His fishing knife, strapped to his belt, was his only defense. Underwater, Mert's survival instincts took over. He drew the knife and struck at the shark's head and gills, areas he had learned were most sensitive. The water around him clouded with blood, his own and the shark's, as he fought to free himself. The shark released him briefly, only to circle back for another attack. Mert could feel his strength waning, his leg throbbing with pain, and his lungs burning for air. As Mert struggled, a tourist boat passing nearby noticed the commotion. The captain, Hassan Demir, was ferrying a small group of divers to a nearby reef when one of the passengers spotted the thrashing in the water. Hassan steered the boat toward the scene, yelling for his passengers to prepare to pull Mert aboard. By the time the boat reached him, Mert was barely conscious. The shark had struck again, tearing into his leg and dragging him further from his boat. Hassan and his crew threw a rope into the water, shouting encouragement as Mert weakly grabbed hold. The shark circled once more, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface. But the boat's noise and the propeller's movement seemed to deter it. With a final burst of effort, Mert was hauled onto the deck, collapsing in a bloody heap. The crew worked quickly to stop the bleeding, using towels and rope to create a makeshift tourniquet. Mert's leg was badly mangled, and he drifted in and out of consciousness as the boat sped back to shore. Onlookers at the harbor gasped when they saw the state of the fisherman, his body covered in wounds and his clothes soaked in blood. Mert was rushed to the nearest hospital, where doctors worked for hours to stabilize him. They managed to save his life, but the damage to his leg was severe, leaving him with a permanent limp. Despite his injuries, Mert's account of the attack quickly spread through Adrasan and beyond, sparking widespread fascination and fear. Marine biologists who later investigated the incident were stunned by the rarity of such an attack in the Mediterranean. While great whites are present in these waters, they are typically elusive and avoid human interaction. Experts speculated that the shark's behavior might have been influenced by environmental factors, such as dwindling fish populations or warmer water temperatures, which could have driven it closer to shore. For Mert, the experience was life-changing. Once a quiet and humble fisherman, he became a reluctant advocate for shark awareness. He shared his story with anyone who would listen, warning fellow fishermen and tourists about the unpredictable dangers of the sea. Though he never returned to fishing, Mert remained a symbol of resilience in Adrasan, and his scars were a reminder of the power and unpredictability of nature. On June 15, 2005, the cool breeze off the Oregon coast promised a productive day at sea. The small port town of Newport, known for its fishing culture, was alive with activity. Fishing boats dotted the harbor, their crews preparing to head to sea. This stretch of the Pacific Ocean was a prime spot for halibut, and local fishermen relied on these waters for their livelihoods. While the area's marine life was diverse and abundant, including seals, dolphins, and occasional sightings of orcas, great white sharks were uncommon, though not unheard of. James Turner, a 42-year-old seasoned fisherman, was among those preparing to set out. He had spent over 2 decades fishing these waters and prided himself on his ability to read the ocean. His small boat, the Marlin, had seen its share of tough weather and long days, but it was dependable, much like James himself. He often fished alone, enjoying the solitude and focus it brought. That morning, James loaded his gear onto the boat, a tackle box, rods, bait, and GPS, and set out just after dawn. The water was calm as James steered his boat several miles offshore to one of his favorite fishing spots. The sun climbed higher, reflecting off the surface as he dropped anchor and began preparing his lines. The rhythm of baiting the hooks and casting them into the water was his second nature. James settled in for what he expected to be a peaceful day, the sound of waves lapping against the hull his only companion. Around mid-morning, James noticed something unusual. A shadow passed beneath the boat, larger than any fish he had seen that day. At first, he thought it might be a seal or even a stray orca, but as he leaned over the side, he spotted the unmistakable outline of a dorsal fin slicing through the water. It was a great white shark whose size was impossible to ignore. James estimated it to be at least 15 feet long, circling his boat with unsettling precision. James had encountered sharks before, but never one this large or this close. His heart raced as he tried to stay calm, observing the predator's movements. The shark circled twice, then disappeared beneath the surface. James took a deep breath, hoping it had moved on. But the boat jolted violently just as he returned to his fishing lines. The shark had struck. Its powerful body slammed into the hull, sending a shudder through the entire boat. James stumbled, grabbing onto the side to steady himself. Before he could react, the shark hit again, biting into the wooden hull. The sound of splintering wood filled the air as the shark thrashed, its massive jaws tearing through the boat's side. Water began to pour into the boat. James scrambled to grab his life jacket and emergency supplies, but the boat was already tipping. Within moments, the Marlin capsized, throwing James into the cold Pacific water. Disoriented, he surfaced, gasping for air and clinging to a piece of wreckage. The shark was still nearby, its dorsal fin cutting through the water as it circled. James clung to the floating debris, his knuckles white as he scanned the water for the predator. The shark passed close enough for him to see its dark, cold eyes, and the rows of sharp teeth that had destroyed his boat. It nudged the wreckage, testing it before moving away. James knew his movements could attract the shark's attention, so he tried to stay as still as possible, though the cold water made his muscles ache. Minutes felt like hours as James drifted, the wreckage keeping him afloat. He used a piece of rope to tie himself to the debris, ensuring he wouldn't slip into the water if he lost consciousness. The shark circled periodically, each pass sending a wave of fear through him. The water around him remained eerily calm, broken only by the sound of the waves and the occasional splash as the shark surfaced. As the hours dragged on, the sun climbed higher, and James felt the sting of salt water and exhaustion setting in. He rationed his energy, knowing he couldn't afford to panic. The shark grew less interested, circling less frequently, but James didn't dare let his guard down. Finally, in the distance, James spotted a faint outline of a fishing boat heading his way. Summoning the last of his strength, he waved and shouted, his voice hoarse from the cold and strain. The boat, the Sea Star, was crewed by fishermen who had noticed the debris floating in the water. As they approached, they spotted James and quickly pulled him aboard. Shivering and exhausted, James recounted the harrowing experience as the crew steered toward shore. The sight of his battered and partially sunken boat confirmed the incredible story. News of the attack spread quickly, shocking the local fishing community and beyond. Marine experts who examined the incident believed the shark's aggressive behavior might have been triggered by hunger and curiosity. The area's declining fish populations, caused by overfishing and environmental changes, could have driven the great white closer to the coast in search of food. Whatever the reason, the attack served as a chilling reminder of the ocean's unpredictability. For James, the experience marked the end of his solo fishing expeditions. Days later, the wreckage of the Marlin was recovered, its hull bearing deep bite marks, a haunting testament to the predator's power that had brought his fishing expedition to a terrifying end. In the quiet morning hours of August 22, 2008, the waters of Pleasant Bay, located near Cape Cod, Massachusetts, were as calm as possible. This large, brackish water inlet, known for its peaceful scenery and abundant wildlife, attracted kayakers, birdwatchers, and fishermen alike. While Pleasant Bay was connected to the Atlantic Ocean through its channels, most people assumed it was safe from the predators of the open sea. The occasional seal sightings were the main attraction for those venturing onto the water, not a cause for concern. Rachel Dyer, 34, was one of the bay's regulars. An experienced kayaker from a nearby town, she often spent her mornings paddling across the gentle waters, enjoying the solitude and rhythm of the bay. That morning was no different. She arrived early, unloaded her bright red kayak, and prepared for another peaceful outing. The air was crisp, and the soft sounds of waves lapping against the shore filled the atmosphere. Rachel packed light: a small bottle of water, her paddle, and a phone sealed in a waterproof bag tucked into the kayak's compartment. By 8 a.m., Rachel glided through the bay, her paddle cutting smoothly through the water. She moved farther from the shore, her kayak drifting toward the quieter, deeper areas of the bay where she could watch seals bob their heads and listen to the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. Everything about the morning seemed routine, the same calm experience she had expected over years of kayaking these waters. About an hour into her paddle, Rachel noticed something unusual. A group of seals resting on a sandbar began to scatter, diving into the water in unison. This caught her attention, as seals often stayed on the sandbars even when kayakers or small boats passed nearby. The water rippled where they had been, and Rachel's kayak rocked slightly. She paused, scanning the surface, but everything appeared normal. Moments later, she noticed a dark, massive shadow moving beneath her kayak. It wasn't a seal, nor was it a fish. The shape was far too large and moved with a deliberate, eerie grace. Rachel froze, her paddle resting across her lap as she tried to understand what she saw. Then, without warning, the shadow grew larger and the water beneath her erupted. A great white shark, estimated later to be over 14 feet long, launched itself from below, striking the side of the kayak with incredible force. The impact sent Rachel tumbling into the water, her paddle spinning away. Disoriented, she surfaced quickly, gasping for air as she clung to the overturned kayak. The shark was still nearby, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a blade. Rachel clung tightly to her kayak, her heart racing as she realized the full scale of her danger. The shark began to circle her, its powerful body creating ripples that rocked the kayak and pulled her closer to the water. With every pass, its fins seemed to come closer, brushing the edge of the kayak and splashing her face with cold water. Her paddle floated out of reach, but she grabbed it during one of the shark's wide turns. Holding it tightly, Rachel positioned herself between the kayak and the predator. The shark made another pass, its jaws snapping open, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. It struck the kayak again, pushing it farther away from her. She scrambled to keep her grip, her fingers slipping against the smooth plastic as water sloshed around her. Each attack felt deliberate, as though the shark was testing its prey. Rachel used the paddle to create distance, jabbing at the water whenever the shark came too close. On one pass, it lunged partially out of the water, its head slamming against the kayak, nearly knocking it away from her grasp. The paddle was her only defense, a makeshift barrier between her and the predator's powerful jaws. Minutes felt like hours as Rachel fought to keep herself afloat and fend off the shark. Her arms ached from gripping the paddle so tightly, and her breath came in ragged gasps. Each time the shark circled, it seemed more aggressive, bumping the kayak harder and closing the distance faster. She began to wonder if help would arrive in time. Unbeknownst to Rachel, a small fishing boat was approaching the bay from a nearby channel. The two fishermen aboard, returning from an early morning trip, noticed the commotion in the water and quickly steered toward it. They could see the red kayak, half submerged, and Rachel waving the paddle frantically from a distance. The sound of the approaching boat's motor disrupted the shark's focus. As the boat neared, the predator circled once more, then turned toward the deeper waters of the bay, its fins slowly disappearing beneath the surface. The fisherman reached Rachel moments later, pulling her aboard as she clung to the side of the boat, her body shaking from exhaustion and fear. Back on shore, Rachel recounted her experience in halting breaths, her hands trembling as she gestured to the damage on her kayak. Deep scratches and bite marks marred its surface, a chilling reminder of how close the encounter had been. Local authorities were notified immediately, and warnings were issued to keep kayakers and small vessels out of the bay until further notice. Marine experts who later investigated the attack were surprised by the shark's presence in Pleasant Bay. While great whites were known to inhabit the waters off Cape Cod, particularly near the seal populations on the outer beaches, their appearance in more enclosed, brackish areas like the bay was unusual. Experts theorized that the shark had followed the seals into the bay while hunting and had encountered Rachel's kayak by chance. For Rachel, the experience was life-altering. Her kayak, once a symbol of peace and freedom, had become a reminder of the ocean's unpredictability. Her story spread quickly, sparking discussions about the growing number of shark encounters near Cape Cod and the importance of safety measures for kayakers in areas with active marine predators. It was a warm summer day on July 10, 2010, and Manhattan Beach. California's sands were bustling with activity. Families set up umbrellas, children built sandcastles, and surfers rode the gentle waves from the Pacific Ocean. Known for its stunning coastline and relatively calm waters, this beach was a favorite for locals and tourists. Great white sharks were occasionally spotted along the California coast, but attacks were rare, especially near crowded beaches. Most people felt safe enjoying the shallow waters, assuming the predators stayed far out to sea, focused on hunting seals and larger fish. Lena Ortega, a 29-year-old office assistant from Pasadena, had taken the weekend to visit friends in Los Angeles. Her morning began with a slow drive to the coast, the easy day she looked forward to after a stressful work week. Lena wasn't a swimmer or surfer. She preferred staying on the sand, enjoying the ocean breeze and watching the waves. That day, she had no plans to go into the water. After arriving at the beach, she parked her car, found a quiet spot near the shoreline, and settled in with a book. By mid-afternoon, the beach was buzzing with energy. People were playing volleyball, tossing frisbees, and running along the waterline. The sun was high, and the heat made the waves look especially inviting. After sitting for hours, Lena decided to take a stroll along the shore to stretch her legs. She walked barefoot along the wet sand, letting the cool water lap at her feet. It was peaceful, a perfect escape from her usual routines. About 20 minutes into her walk, Lena stopped near a quieter stretch of the beach. The crowds had thinned here, and the sound of waves was soothing. She stood at the surf's edge, letting the water wash over her toes. Feeling relaxed, she waded farther in, the water reaching her knees. It was refreshing, and she thought about venturing deeper for a moment, but she stayed close to the shore, hesitant about going too far. Unbeknownst to Lena, something was moving just beyond the shallow waves. A great white shark, estimated later to be over 12 feet long, had wandered into the area. Great whites are apex predators known for their incredible hunting instincts. They typically patrol deeper waters, feeding on seals and large fish, but they sometimes venture closer to shore, drawn by currents or prey. This shark was no exception, and its presence went unnoticed by the beachgoers. Lena felt a sudden tug at the water around her legs. The sensation startled her, but before she could move, the shark struck. It lunged from beneath the surface, its powerful jaws clamping onto her thigh with crushing force. The impact knocked Lena off her feet and into the shallow water. She screamed in pain and terror as the predator dragged her a few feet toward deeper water. The water churned violently around her as Lena kicked and thrashed, desperate to free herself. Blood clouded the waves and the shark's grip felt unrelenting. The force of its attack left her disoriented, her mind racing as she struggled to stay above the surface. The shallow water offered some resistance, and the shark released her briefly, circling back for another strike. Nearby, a surfer named Adam Wells heard Lena's cries and saw the commotion. He could see the unmistakable shape of a large dorsal fin cutting through the water from his position on his board. He paddled toward the scene without hesitation, shouting to alert others on shore. The shark returned, its body brushing against Lena as it prepared to strike again. She clung to the sand, trying to crawl back toward the shore. But the predator's size and strength were overwhelming. Adam reached her just in time, using his surfboard to create a barrier between Lena and the shark. He splashed and swung his board, drawing the shark's attention and creating enough distraction for Lena to inch closer to safety. The shark circled once more, its movement slower but still threatening. It seemed hesitant, perhaps deterred by the water's commotion and shallowness. Adam continued splashing and maneuvering his board, keeping between Lena and the predator. After what felt like an eternity, the shark turned away, its dorsal fin disappearing beneath the surface. Lena crawled onto the sand, her leg bleeding heavily. Adam followed, helping her to higher ground as beachgoers rushed to her. The scene was chaotic, with people shouting for lifeguards and gathering in shock. Lifeguards arrived within minutes, administering first aid and working to stop the bleeding while they waited for paramedics. The attack left Lena shaken and in pain, but she was alive. Her thigh bore deep wounds, clear evidence of the shark's powerful bite. The bite marks, later examined by marine experts, confirmed the attacker as a great white shark. Authorities issued warnings for swimmers and beachgoers, urging them to stay out of the water while they monitored for further sightings. The incident shocked the local community, sparking debates about shark activity along the California coast. Experts explained that while great white sharks rarely attack humans, they are known to mistake people for their natural prey, especially in areas where seals are present. The increased sightings of sharks near beaches were linked to environmental changes, including warmer waters and shifting prey populations. For Lena, the attack was a terrifying and life-changing event. What had started as a peaceful day at the beach turned into a fight for survival, a stark reminder of the ocean's unpredictability and the power of its top predators. The Bahamas is a dream destination for tourists, with its turquoise waters, white sand beaches, and thriving coral reefs. Known for its marine biodiversity, the islands attract visitors eager to snorkel, dive, and explore its underwater wonders. The warm waters of the Atlantic are home to reef sharks, nurse sharks, and hammerheads, and tourists often spot them on guided tours. Great white sharks, however, are rare visitors to the area, typically preferring colder waters. When they appear, their presence is unusual, often tied to changes in the ecosystem. On July 15, 2004, Peter Collins, a 36-year-old accountant from Brighton, England, was enjoying his first vacation to the Bahamas with his wife, Karen. For years, Peter had dreamed of visiting the islands, drawn by their beauty and promise of adventure. Though he spent much of his life in an office, Peter loved the outdoors. He was an avid swimmer, a nature enthusiast, and someone who rarely turned down the chance to try something new. This trip had been planned for months. Karen, who was more cautious by nature, had booked a guided snorkeling tour for them as a safe way to explore the ocean. The couple joined a group of 10 tourists on a small chartered boat that morning. Their guide, Desmond Blake, a seasoned local with over a decade of experience, assured everyone that the waters near the reef were calm and teeming with harmless marine life. The group was excited, their energy buzzing as they prepared their gear. By mid-morning, the boat arrived at Shark Point, a well-known snorkeling site famous for its vibrant coral reefs and schools of tropical fish. The reef's name was a nod to the small reef sharks that occasionally passed through. curious but harmless to humans. The water was calm and the visibility was exceptional, allowing the group to see straight to the sandy bottom below. Desmond gave final instructions and the group entered the water individually. Peter adjusted his mask and snorkel, gripping Karen's hand as they floated together near the boat. The water was warm, and they could see bright coral formations and colorful fish darting around them. It was as magical as Peter had imagined. Karen stayed close to the surface while Peter ventured farther from the group, drawn by the reef's beauty. He swam slowly, marveling at the schools of fish that surrounded him. About 20 minutes into the tour, Peter noticed something unusual. The fish around him began to scatter, darting toward the coral as if seeking shelter. The water, full of life moments earlier, seemed eerily empty. A faint shadow appeared beneath him, and Peter's first thought was that it might be a larger fish or one of the small sharks Desmond had mentioned. He continued to float, watching closely. The shadow grew larger and moved with deliberate speed. Peter's breath quickened as he realized this was no harmless reef shark. Over 13 feet long, a great white shark was rising from the depths. Its size and power were unmistakable, its movement smooth and calculated. Later, experts theorized that the shark had wandered into the area, likely drawn by the abundance of fish or currents carrying prey closer to shore. Before Peter could react, the shark lunged. It struck with astonishing speed, its powerful jaws clamping onto Peter's shoulder. The force of the attack knocked Peter's snorkel loose, and he inhaled a mouthful of seawater as he was dragged downward. Pain shot through his body as the shark's teeth tore into him. Blood clouded the water, spreading quickly as Peter thrashed in desperation. Still near the boat, Karen heard the commotion and turned in time to see Peter struggling. Her scream alerted Desmond, who immediately signaled the group to return to the ship. The tourists scrambled, their movements frantic as they splashed back toward safety. Desmond, however, dove into the water, swimming toward Peter as fast as he could. The shark released Peter briefly, its massive body circling back for another strike. Peter floated, dazed and bleeding, his energy fading. Desmond reached him just as the shark returned, placing himself between Peter and the predator. He grabbed Peter under the arms and began towing him toward the boat, yelling for the crew to throw down the ladder. The shark circled them, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a blade. It moved closer, its black eyes fixed on the struggling pair. Desmond kicked hard, using his legs to propel them forward, while keeping a firm grip on Peter. The shark lunged again, but this time it struck the water near them instead of making contact. The noise from the boat's engine and the commotion disrupted its focus. As they reached the side of the boat, crew members pulled Peter aboard. His shoulder was badly mangled, blood dripping onto the deck as Karen rushed to his side. Desmond climbed aboard moments later, his face pale but determined. The shark lingered briefly near the surface before disappearing into the depths. On board, the crew worked quickly to stop Peter's bleeding. They had only towels and a first aid kit, but they managed to stabilize him enough to make the trip back to shore. Peter drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride, his wife holding his hand tightly. The other tourists sat in stunned silence, their excitement from earlier replaced with shock and fear. At the hospital in Nassau, doctors confirmed that Peter's injuries were severe but not life-threatening. The bite had torn through muscle and tissue, requiring extensive stitches and a long recovery period. Marine biologists later examined photographs of Peter's injuries and concluded that the shark's behavior was likely a case of mistaken identity. The movement of the snorkelers in the water, combined with the reflections from the surface, might have triggered its hunting instincts. The attack sent shockwaves through the local tourism industry. While shark encounters in the Bahamas were not uncommon, an attack of this nature was almost unheard of. Officials temporarily suspended snorkeling tours in the area while they investigated the incident. Meanwhile, Peter's story spread quickly, drawing attention to the risks of human activity in shark habitats. The experience was a stark reminder for Peter of the ocean's unpredictability. He later spoke about respecting marine life and understanding the risks of entering their world. His story became a cautionary tale for tourists, a vivid example of the delicate balance between adventure and safety in the natural world. On February 17, 2006, the waves along Ruapuke Beach in Raglan, New Zealand, were rolling steadily, perfect for surfing. Raglan, a small coastal town on the North Island, is famous for its world-class surf breaks and dramatic coastline. Popular spots like Manu Bay and Whale Bay draw surfers worldwide, but Ruapuk Beach, further south, offers a more remote experience. Known for its consistent swells and untouched beauty, it's a favorite among experienced surfers looking for solitude. While the waters around Raglan are home to a wide variety of marine life, including seals, dolphins, and smaller fish, sightings of great white sharks are rare. Still, they inhabit New Zealand's waters, and every surfer knows the unspoken risk. Dylan Reed, a 28-year-old local, had spent his life surfing the breaks of Raglan. For Dylan, surfing wasn't just a hobby but a way of life. He was known among his friends for his confidence in the water, often venturing to less crowded beaches to test his skills. Ruapuk Beach, with its long, consistent waves, was his go-to spot. Dylan loved the peace it offered, far from the busier breaks where tourists gathered. That morning, Dylan woke early, as he often did, eager to catch the waves before the wind picked up. He loaded his board into his van, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and made the 20-minute drive south. The air was crisp as he parked near the dunes and carried his board down the narrow path to the beach. The tide was rising and the waves looked promising. Dylan zipped up his wetsuit, secured the leash to his ankle, and waded into the cool water. By 8 a.m., Dylan paddled past the break, his arms cutting smoothly through the surface. The ocean was calm. The only sounds were the rhythmic crash of waves and the occasional call of seabirds. He reached his usual spot, about 200 meters offshore, and sat on his board, scanning the horizon for the next set. The solitude was exactly what he loved, a moment of quiet before the rush of catching a wave. Dylan easily caught his first wave, carving smoothly down the face before kicking out. He paddled back out, his mind already focused on the next ride. Unbeknownst to him, something was moving below the surface. Great white sharks are stealthy hunters, capable of moving undetected as they search for prey. Experts later theorized that the shark Dylan encountered may have been following a school of fish or seals, mistaking the movement of his board for prey. The first sign of danger was subtle as Dylan sat on his board. A ripple passed near him, too faint to draw his attention. Then, without warning, the water erupted beneath him. A massive white shark surged upward, its jaws clamping onto Dylan's right leg with incredible force. The impact knocked him off his board and into the water. Pain shot through his body as the shark thrashed, pulling him deeper. Underwater, Dylan's survival instincts kicked in. He kicked at the shark with his free leg, aiming for its head and gills, sensitive areas he knew could force it to release him. The water churned as the shark's powerful tail created a vortex, making it harder for Dylan to fight. Blood clouded the water around him, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the shark released him, retreating briefly as Dylan surfaced, gasping for air. His relief was short-lived. The shark wasn't done. The shark circled back as Dylan grabbed onto his board, trying to stay afloat. Its dorsal fin cut through the water, a chilling reminder that he was still in its territory. Dylan paddled frantically toward the shore, his injured leg dragging behind him. The beach felt impossibly far, and each stroke drained his strength. The shark struck again, ramming the underside of Dylan's board and flipping him into the water. Disoriented, he struggled to find the surface, his lungs burning as he fought to stay calm. The shark's second attack was even more violent, its teeth grazing his side as it attempted to pull him under. Dylan used his fists and elbows to strike the shark's head, creating enough distraction to break free. Climbing back onto his board, Dylan focused on reaching the shore. Every movement was agony, his injured leg leaving a trail of blood that he knew could attract the shark again. The predator followed closely, its fin dipping in and out of view as it shadowed him. Dylan yelled for help, though he knew no one was nearby to hear him. The shallow water seemed to stretch endlessly, but Dylan pushed through the pain, paddling with everything he had left. The shark made one last approach, bumping his board hard enough to knock him off again nearly. Desperate, Dylan splashed at the water and yelled, trying to appear larger and more threatening. The noise and movement seemed to deter the shark, which finally veered away, disappearing into the deeper water. When Dylan reached the shore, he collapsed onto the sand, his body trembling with exhaustion and shock. Blood seeped from the wounds on his leg and side, pooling beneath him as he tried to catch his breath. A group of surfers further down the beach noticed him and ran to help, using towels and their boards to create a makeshift stretcher. They carried him up the dunes and called for emergency services. Paramedics arrived quickly, stabilizing Dylan and rushing him to the nearest hospital. His injuries were severe, deep bite marks on his leg and lacerations on his torso, but he had survived. Doctors later marveled at the fact that none of the bites had severed major arteries, a stroke of luck that likely saved his life. News of the attack spread quickly, shocking the surfing community in Raglan and beyond. Local officials issued warnings, advising surfers to avoid remote beaches and remain vigilant in the water. Marine biologists studied the incident, noting that while shark attacks in New Zealand were rare, environmental changes and shifting prey patterns could increase encounters between humans and predators. Dylan's harrowing experience with the ocean's top predator left him with deep physical and emotional scars. Facing life-threatening danger not once but twice in mere minutes, he defied the odds and survived to tell his tale. His story resonated far beyond the surf community, becoming an exemplary example of the unpredictable risks lurking in unregulated waters. It ignited crucial conversations about surf safety, raising awareness of the balance between human adventure and respecting the untamed power of nature's fiercest forces.